Welcome to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Rosalind. I'm a serial entrepreneur and social innovator. I like to gather people from all different walks to talk about what I call the conscious economy. I believe that we can create a more equitable system, one that honors the well-being of people, the well-being of the planet, the well-being of business, and includes art and creativity. Join us each week as we tackle a different intersection of this big but critical conversation. What's up, everyone? Today's episode is a throwback from our 2020 Lunar Club podcast. And this particular episode is featuring Melissa Allen. She's an incredible venture capitalist and great friend of the brand. And this conversation that we had was really focused around combating racism through finance, really understanding our economic power and how that can create systemic change. So I just thought it was such a relevant conversation. There's so many of you now that are following us and listening, so I thought that this would be a great throwback. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. I am sitting here at Lunar Club headquarters in downtown Toronto, and I am here sitting with Melissa. I'm so excited to have her here. We have a unique little story of how we just got connected because Melissa actually slid into my DMs on Instagram.
Slid right in there.
Tell us about why you felt compelled to reach out, and then we can talk about our newfound love for one another in uniting around these causes of economic healing, of transforming our systems, of tackling systemic racism, all of the things that get me excited. Tell me about it.
Okay, definitely. So I have heard about you for a long time because I just remember seeing you, I guess, in the media here and there. And I'm like, oh, this young woman is running the Economic Club of Canada. Interesting, cool. But I never thought more of it. But always in the back of my head is like, she's so young and she's running it. Like, what's her story? And I wasn't quick to assume that you came from a wealthy family or that, you have your MBA from Queens or something like that. But it was kind of in the back of my head. And I'm like, I don't have time to look into that. So I'll just leave it for now and just admire what you're doing from afar. And then I remember when you hosted Obama, it was an incredible event. And it's funny because you were the one doing the interview. And I was like, oh, she's doing the interview. Okay, interesting. And then I heard really good things about it. But of course, right, everybody was like, oh, how come she picked herself to do the interview? How come she didn't pick anybody else? And I was like, fair question. Okay. And then I heard that podcast interview with Ryan Holtz, and you just blew that interview away. You were just so raw, so authentic. And I really got you. I understood what you were trying to do, but what you did. And I also understood that when you're a visionary and you push the envelope, it makes people uncomfortable. And you disrupted a certain old way of doing things, and it made people uncomfortable. And it's funny because now that's going to become the new norm. Now people are talking about that. But earlier, less than a year ago, what you were doing was very forward-thinking and controversial. And now it's starting to be the norm. But when I heard that podcast interview, I was like, I totally get it. Oh my goodness. And I'm so glad you did that interview because then I also got to hear about your personal journey. No, you did not come from money. No, you're not like a Queen's MBA who was parachuted into this role. You worked your butt off for it and you produced and you took the Economic Club of Toronto to another level with your own ideas, and you were bold enough to present them and make it happen. And then to hear how you took over the organization and transformed it, that whole entire interview was basically a blueprint for a new kind of leadership from somebody who doesn't come from a typical background where they would be groomed for leadership. And I really took that interview to heart, and I probably listened to it one or two more times. And then when an opportunity fell into my lap, which is what we're going to talk about later, where I will be in a leadership role, a visible leadership role, I actually listened to that podcast interview again.
Wow.
Yeah, because again, the perspective you have, the experience you have, the wisdom and knowledge you draw, combined with the fact that I'm hearing a woman about my age who has made it this far and who's made a success of it, it was motivation and inspiration to me. And so I've always had it in the back of my mind that I'm going to reach out to you and we're going to become BFFs. But I'm like, I had to wait for the right moment. And then when I had this opportunity to run this fund, which we'll talk about, and again, me being in a visible position.
Well, let's just talk about that
Okay,
just to
great.
get it out
Okay.
because, yeah, I think that this is so interesting. And then I already have a million things I want to say even to what you just said. So, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So I'm a financial advisor, wealth manager by day. I love the investment world. I love finances. I've been doing wealth management for 5 years. My previous background is in digital marketing. And I wanted to combine both my love of technology and of investing in finance. And also, I want to help shape technology of the future. I want to sit at that table. The best way I realized that I could do that was in an angel investing venture capital capacity. So in 2018, I got really into researching, studying about venture capital. I did the Female Funders Angel Academy, which is an accelerator for women who want to get into VC. And then I just met so many amazing people in the industry. After that, I did my first venture capital investment, became a limited partner. And through that network and those contacts, like what fell in my lap a couple of months ago was this opportunity to help run a new VC fund.
Okay. So first of all, I mean, for anybody who's listening, I mean, you've just shared a bit of your background, but to sit here in front of, a young Black woman who is going to be leading up operations for this incredible venture capital fund that is specifically run by people who have this experience and who understand how important it is that VC dollars flow to groups that have been left out, have been, not able to access that capital, that wealth. And we could go into the statistics around where venture capital typically goes and who is left out of the equation. But it's very, very traditionally, we don't see a lot of women being able to be successful in the VC space. We certainly don't see Black Indigenous entrepreneurs getting into those particular positions and having that kind of investment into their businesses. So this is revolutionary, game-changing stuff. And when you sent me, so you slid into my DM and you had commented on, a podcast that I had just released.
Yes.
And you told me that this was happening and I instantly knew that I had to speak to you. It's funny because you said you were kind of watching me from afar and I was in my own way praying to find you, I feel. And my team and I were always talking about these issues and how we can make more representative programming and how we can start to connect the dots on some of what I believe is not discussed. And we can get into that around the world of finance, economics, and just success in general. There's just so much that isn't really honest.
A lot to unpack. And I cannot wait to do that with you.
Yeah, so much to unpack. And so we're just getting ready to release this new mindfulness and money program, which will now be out for people to see. And we were like, who is the right young Black woman who can speak to this and that this is a part of their DNA? And when I met you, I was like, oh my gosh, you are an economic healer. And I call myself an economic healer as well. And so it's just so amazing to meet people that are in that tribe because I feel like they're starting to come forward right now. I've been setting intention every day in my meditation to just please let me be guided to the people that want to do this work from this heart space and who want to combine this idea of heart and business, of heart and finance, of real, true social justice reform with new economic infrastructure. So that is exactly who you are. So I guess the first thing that I want to really pick your brain on is why do you feel that there are these barriers for entrepreneurs, particularly women, Black entrepreneurs, Indigenous entrepreneurs? Why do you think that these entrepreneurs face so many challenges when it comes to finding that right investment seed capital?
This is so good. I'm like, okay, so how deep do I want to go here? I mean, if we want to go way back, right, into the DNA of our North American, of our Western culture, if we want to go that far back, quite frankly, there was a time where the country, it was built for a certain category of people, of individuals to thrive and others to not thrive. And so when you're dealing with 200 years of that systemic, I guess, racism, of colonization, exclusionary practices, to undo, I guess, that DNA that's really woven into the fabric of our current society, sometimes psychologically way more than we realize. It's like swimming against a current, right? And we can start there. And then we fast forward to modern day times, right? You know, anybody can make it now, quote unquote, yet it's still so hard for people from, say, disadvantaged or priority communities to move forward and to become entrepreneurs. And a lot of that is, quite frankly, the barriers to entry are still there. They're just a lot more invisible, right?
Which makes it so much worse. It's such a facade in so many ways.
It is a facade because a lot of entrepreneurs and successful ones, what you don't realize is how much support that they have behind the scenes that come from generational wealth and generational privilege, right? And so when you're not only starting from scratch as like the children of immigrants, but you're starting from even like less than scratch because, again, you're in a neighborhood where not a lot of people are thriving. And because it's the only neighborhood you could afford, then you go to certain schools where other people aren't thriving as well as they could. And that's all you see. And then the only people that you see who are successful that look like you and that are in your community are the ones that made it out through music and through sports, right? If you don't see that, then you don't become that, like, quite frankly. And I think that's another huge issue is that there's an image problem of who gets to be successful and how they get to be successful. And I almost feel like, say, for example, in the Black community, I think culturally and from the standpoint of society, a lot of times it looks like, especially if you're young and you're Black, the only way you could be successful is through sports or hip hop. I'll never forget when I was like maybe in university, went to school for business. I went to like a family barbecue. A friend of a friend brought their little boy. So he was adorable. And I was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, a rapper or a basketball player. And I was like, oh my goodness, like it sounds so cliche and stereotypical, but just out of the mouths of babe, it's actually true. Like that's literally what a 7-year-old thinks that he can be in order to be successful. And I remember saying to him, like, you don't just have to be that, you know, what do you really want to be? Like, tell me, you can tell me. And he actually said, he paused and he looked at me right in the eye and he said, a police officer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much to unpack there because, okay, first, I think that when those young children are saying, you know, I want to be that rapper or I want to be that basketball player or whatever it is, what they're really saying is, I want to be seen and successful.
Exactly.
I want to be seen and successful. And if we don't show people other, you know, versions of that success, representative success, then we don't know, we don't see to believe to even imagine that that pathway is there for us.
Exactly. And I'm not going to make any conspiracy theories, but I do think that there's an element of the fact that young Black people, particularly young Black males, a lot of times the only people that they see out there in the media that they can look up to are athletes and artists and people in the music industry. And part of me wonders, quite frankly, that was by design. And we can only be successful in these areas. And these other areas, we can't be successful like in those areas for many reasons, right? And many, I guess, reasons that are related to systemic racism. My purpose on this planet, and you can relate to this too, is to get rid of that notion.
Yeah.
Here in Toronto, I want a little Black child to look up to tech entrepreneurs as their heroes.
Yes.
And that is my life purpose.
That is so beautiful to sit with someone who has so clearly defined their purpose with such precision. And I think even when we say these words like systemic racism, I don't even know if people really understand all that is encompassed in even that term. And it's coming to this idea of epigenetics, of our DNA being encoded with these experiences. So like you said, if we take it all the way back to the beginning and the design of the system, which the system currently right now that we are operating, the economic system that is operating in our Western world is one that was based on colonization and slavery and using other groups to basically build the foundation of wealth.
Absolutely.
And so when we go into, when everyone kind of thinks, well, that all stopped and ended when the end of residential schools or when, you know, slavery was abolished. But what most people, you know, will talk about is this idea of the modern day slavery being economic slavery. Every human being wants to be able to see somebody who looks like them doing something that they love.
Yep.
Absolutely. So when we talk about this idea of epigenetics and and our surrounding actually having this psychological influence on what we believe we can do, we understand why that systemic issue becomes so ingrained. Because if everyone around us, or the majority of people around us, have had some kind of trauma or struggle around money or wealth or finance or whatever else, how can we rid our systems of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is the answer in your mind to helping us rid our systems of that toxicity?
That is such a great question. I'm just so excited about this conversation we're having. So I'll start with like a little story about myself and how I quote unquote got to where I am. It took to even consider myself to be somebody capable of going after and obtaining success. I had to invest a lot of time and money in getting rid of old stories and old patterns about worthiness. Whether I was even competent enough to do it, talented enough to do it, would anybody take me seriously? Was I one of these people who could be successful? I had to do so much work around that because I'm not a scientist, right? But it is a proven fact that generational trauma can change our DNA, right? And but the good news about that is that we can also change it again.
Yeah.
It just takes a lot of...
Neuroplasticity, baby.
Amen.
Yeah.
It's such good news.
Yeah.
And so... I'll go back to my story in a moment, but to quickly answer your question is that an entire mindset and shift in consciousness needs to happen even before we start with like the financial literacy, like what's a TFSA, what's a 401k for our American friends, etc. Even before we learn the basics of investments, we have to go back into our mindsets and really unpack and unwind and undo the damage of worthiness, self-sabotage, and self-doubt. And like a little story to share about me is that when I was getting ready to make my first major investment in a VC fund, I got the opportunity in March after I finished the accelerator program. And it was a woman, she is a general partner of this VC firm based out of BC. They have offices all over Canada. And she's become an amazing mentor to me, Rhiannon Rosalind. And so she presented this opportunity and she did that in March. In June, I went to a personal and professional development retreat in Greece. And we did this money story exercise where we had to journal to uncover any kind of blocks, subconscious blocks we had and stories we had around money. And that's when I realized through my journaling that I did all the right things you're supposed to do. I studied about venture capital. I learned about it. I networked with the right people. But when it came time to actually take the step to put my money where my mouth is in terms of a dream I wanted to accomplish, I was afraid to take that next step because when that opportunity got proposed to me, all of a sudden I was extremely confronted. And I was confronted with, do they actually know who I am? Do they know that I'm kind of a nobody? I'm not a family office. I'm not an institutional investor. I'm not an ultra high net worth person. I don't look like a VC person from Silicon Valley. All these stories and programs just popped up out of nowhere that I had no idea even existed. And I have done so much work on myself over the years. And even still in that moment, I was crippled with self-doubt. After Lauren presented the opportunity to invest. I didn't even reach out to her, didn't follow up with her. I think she sent another follow-up email. I ignored it because little did I know in my head, I was still running the program that...
You're stunted.
that I'm actually not that person. Like, who am I? Like this young Black girl who's going to be investing alongside like all of these ultra high net worth people, high flyers, like all these like big companies. And I'm like, no, that's not for me. Like, I'm not ready yet. You know, that's my goal in 10 years. That's actually what I said to me. And now that I look...
So the manifestation was in front of you and you weren't ready to step into it because your self-worth hadn't matched, you hadn't built that container of success yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I resonate with this big time. I mean, this has been my experience as well. And I have to say, well, thank you for sharing that, first of all, because I think it's so powerful to hear other people's stories of this. And this is what I mean by conscious economics, that consciousness and our new economic system are connected, that we have to shift our consciousness, that we have to go into the subconscious, not only of our individual selves, but there's collective stories there too.
Yeah.
So not only do you have your own personal experience, you also have the collective experience of what it means to be a Black woman, what it means to be your age, what it means that you don't look like you belong on Silicon Valley because this is what it looks like or that's what it looks like. So there's so much unpacking to do. And most of us go around never recognizing or realizing, A, that we have these subconscious stories and limiting beliefs. B, that we can rewrite them. I think that's the most powerful thing.
Yes.
Our brains are rewritable.
Absolutely.
Our brains are like a very, very complex computer system. And right now, what we have is we've downloaded certain programs from a young age, and those programs are still running. And so unless we do conscious work, or we're able to through mentorship, or, you know, by changing our environment or collecting new experiences, we have to actually really recognize what's running down there.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's so, so powerful.
It really was. And I'm so grateful that I had at least done like the inner work up to that point to be able to even start to recognize that was going on. And it's funny to like, when I look back, you know, I'm like educated, professional working world. I've saved an amount of money. I even have, you know, investment properties, and yet still thought that this world was close to me, that I didn't belong. And I almost let myself be shut out of the opportunity as a result. And it was only until, like I said, I went to this retreat in Greece where we had a whole like 4-hour session on money and our money stories. And that's when I realized the programs that were holding me back. And personally, like what was holding me back was, of course, those internal stories of not feeling like I fit into what a typical venture capitalist looked like. But also I saw the story of like my mom and my dad. My parents are divorced. But I saw each of them work so hard to be successful. My mom, she worked so hard against all odds to become successful and also in the wealth management industry. And I saw what she had to go through. And for somebody who worked in the 80s and 90s to get where she is, it's incredible. And I also know that she has bigger sights, but sometimes, you know, you hit this glass ceiling. And so I also had those stories running.
Like a guilt around this came quicker for you and you watched her struggle.
There's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that. And there's also the fact that it almost felt like I was psychologically hitting my head against the same glass ceilings that she was, even though they weren't there. They actually weren't there for me.
Yeah. Self-imposed.
Yeah, they were self-imposed. Yeah. Exactly. And then I realized it's like, no. I'm not going to relive my parents' experience. I was almost programmed to relive that cycle and therefore to stop myself from progressing like much further. Even though my parents had set it up for me so that I could, I still almost stunted myself to not progress even further because of what I saw, like what I see with the previous generation of, say, Jamaican immigrants. Like some are so incredibly successful. But, you know, as a whole, there were barriers. And I almost imposed those same ones from like the 90s and the 80s and the early 2000s on myself.
Wow.
And then I realized like, no, this is a new world. And obviously, like Lauren, the general partner at that VC firm, Highline Beta, she saw something in me to offer me this opportunity and also to become a mentor to me. And I realized that to go where I want to go and to live out the passions and the purpose that I want to live out and execute on, it's going to require me to be a new version of myself. Not different, not better, but a new version. I had to step into a new identity of Melissa where I was like a leader in the venture capital space, right? Where I could have a seat at a advisory or boardroom table. Me, who's younger, I have like braids. I had to really redefine for myself what the image of an ultra successful, influential, impactful person, and in this case, in the VC space, looked like. And I had to say that even if I was the only one, this is what it's going to look like for me from now on. And I had to step into it, no matter how scary or intimidating it was. I was like, you know what? It's a story. Like, who says that because I didn't go to Stanford and work in Silicon Valley and have a wildly successful startup first, who says that that means I'm not qualified or not deserving of having this opportunity? Who says that? Completely made up.
Well, and this is the thing. And so I think that there's a couple of things to unpack here. One, I love that you redefined your own self, that you started there at the root. I think that that's the exact message that we're trying to push with all the programming that we're doing, is that that's actually where it starts. And I can relate to that. I can relate to this idea also of acting out other people's biases. Like, so I would walk into a boardroom and I present young. I am young. I'm young to be there and a woman, and I do not have the background. I don't have the education background that most people have in being the CEO of the Economic Club of Canada. My story was so quite unique. And every time I would walk into a boardroom, I would perceive the bias that people were wondering why I was there. And then I would actually act it out. I would shrink. I would do exactly what they wanted me to do in so many ways. Like, I would not feel like I belonged, so I wouldn't be able to vocalize my opinions. I wouldn't be able to do whatever. And in the end of the day, I'd leave and they'd be like, yep, just another young woman who shouldn't be here. Yeah. And so when I finally realized, oh my God, I am actually helping re-perpetuate these biases against women from my own insecurity, from my own lack mentality, from my unconscious limiting beliefs. And so what helped me was I was like, I got to do this for all women. Like, you know, I went into that mind and I was like, I've got to be able to write this in myself so that I can walk into a space, I can own it, and I can redefine what a woman looks like in a boardroom. And that, you know, if you walk in as a Black woman with braids, or if I walk in with like kooky rings and whatever else, that I can just be me. And I slowly started to take off the mask or peel off the layer that I was trying so hard to present, which was like, I fit in, don't look at me, to like, no, I don't. Yeah. I don't fit in at all. So why am I pretending? Why am I wearing fake? I wore fake glasses for years.
You're playing a game that you're going to lose if you do that, because that game was not set up for you to win.
True.
So if you're going to keep playing that, you're going to lose. I'm so glad that both of us figured that out like early enough.
I mean, and this is what I think everybody needs to figure out, is that you are your most powerful when you are yourself, but you are also your most powerful when you are your best, most aligned version of yourself. And that is a personal journey. Only you can really go into that subconscious and see what limiting beliefs are down there. And, you know, I've done an incredible program. It's been life-changing for me in this work. And it sounds like you've been doing the same. And there's so many resources for it. But what I find is true in my experience is that when we're talking about systemic injustice, when we're talking about financial literacy, we are not talking from this lens. And this is exactly where we need to start.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll tell you, working in the wealth management financial services industry, number one is right away, I could relate to the fact that you're perceived as like it's still an old school industry. It's trying to be moved forward, but it's still old school.
Yeah.
So I found like a lot of aspects of it problematic, but at the same time, I realized that I was a resource for people who had negative experiences in the financial services industry in the first place, and who maybe were overlooked by investment advisors and financial advisors because of whatever perceived biases. And we'd be talking about like a young millionaire heiress or, you know, a single Black mom. But either way, I noticed that there was a huge gap between, I guess you could say, a huge gap between, I guess, like the resources that were available to certain groups of people versus other people.
Yep.
And
that's systemic injustice and racism right there. And there's also this idea, and I see this happen a lot, and I see it with a lot of well-meaning, liberally minded white people, where it's like, oh, I want to make the world a better place. I want to help different groups. I'm for equality. I'm for diversity and inclusion. But I think that there is a specific piece missing if you have not endured some of those traumas yourself.
Absolutely.
Because you come in and you're like, well, here's all the information. Here's the opportunity. Here's the mentor. Here's the whatever. But what you don't understand is that, you know, and for me, I have complex PTSD. So I have trouble sometimes paying attention for long periods of time. I have so many different issues that I have to deal with on a regular basis that show up for me that actually prevent me from seizing some of these opportunities. Exactly. It could be quite overwhelming.
Exactly. And that's actually like the point that I was trying to develop in my head, was that as a financial advisor, I see it. I can sit down with a person who has a lot of potential for building wealth for themselves, give them all the information, break it down in a way that they intellectually understand, no problem. And yet they don't do it, and they keep financially harming themselves and financially self-sabotaging. And that's because even before obtaining like the hard skills and hard knowledge like financial literacy and things like that, there are some mental blocks and some financial trauma that needs to be healed, some blocks that need to be uncovered and listed in order for the person to be able to really receive
100%.
Resources. Because if it were just a matter of financial literacy, it just needs to be taught in school, like, we would be fine.
We'd be fine.
Quite frankly, those who want to save and invest and become rich would do so.
Yeah.
But if I'm explaining individually to a person, this is what happens when you invest this percentage of your paycheck every month or twice a month. And this is what will happen in 15 years' time with compounding interest and dividends, et cetera. And they still don't want to do it, and they're still suspicious. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they don't hesitate on, say, spending $5,000 on a vacation or $300 on a bag. Then it's something deeper. There's something going on psychologically that no amount of information and resources will resolve or reconcile.
Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investees. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investees is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investees account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvestees.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now back to the episode. We have an economic system that is only sustains through this mass consumerism. Mm. And mass consumerism is presented as the way to solve all of our problems. Yeah. And it keeps us indebted. And then everything around finance and financial wealth is just packaged in such a way it's kind of boring. It feels far away. It feels unattainable, unreachable. And we feel ourselves skeptical of that, like you said, but not skeptical of, this $1,000 purse that's going to make me magically a better person. Mm-hmm. We give into that. And I feel like it's almost all by design in so many ways.
Absolutely.
It just really is. It's the ingrained systemic oppression and the economic slavery that is embedded in the system. And this is the kind of stuff that we need to kind of reveal ourselves. And it's so interesting for me because at this point, I might as well have a PhD in public policy and economics. I mean, I've been sitting at the tables with world leaders, prime ministers, presidents, policymakers. I've sat and chaired over thousands of lectures and been there, but I come from a different lens. And when I would sit and I would look and I would listen, I was able to make certain connections that were happening that it didn't seem like anybody else was making. And I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Like, how can you fix an economic issue when the whole economy is predicated on mass consumption, on taking advantage of laborers, on everything at the cost of the almighty dollar?
Yes.
And then you wonder about creating a more sustainable thing for the planet, or you want to talk about ending racism. Like, wake up. Like, it's all interconnected.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. It very much is. And I find, like, believe it or not, in marginalized communities, it's actually even worse, because in communities that have traditionally had more advantages, at least there's this ingrained knowledge and information and access to resources and even just...
Well, and from people that look like you.
Exactly. And a history of prosperity.
Yep.
Right? So at least there's that to be able to temper the consumerism. But when you're coming from a marginalized community where it's very little prosperity and a lot of consumerism and demand that's manufactured by the public-facing figures that we see every day, cultural figures, in music and sports and the money that they're spending, it's a recipe for continued, quite frankly, economic slavery.
I would say that we are evolutionarily stuck. We are not evolving. We are stuck. And so I always look at the chakra system of the body. Mm-hmm. And so the chakra system of the body is the energy centers of the body. And so it starts at the root, which is your foundation, which would be like, your shelter, your survival, and then it moves up the body. And the third chakra, the solar plex, is the accumulation of power, status, wealth, which is on the way up. It's not like we don't need it. Like, yeah, of course you should have material abundance. That would be part of it.
Not against it.
But the next part is to go to the heart space, to go to the communication, to go through eventually that enlightened, self-actualized place. And so again, when we see that the only versions of success that we see in our society are material, And they're all about, when you have the Birkin or you have this or you have that, then that equals success. And when you keep feeding that to young people who are probably not going to be in the position to ever even have one of those, then you are ingraining mental health and you are ingraining a lack without even realizing it. You think you're empowering by showing what that is, but you're actually re-ingraining lack, separation, and the inability to actually evolve beyond that. And so this is really, I think, a revolutionary time on the planet. I think that COVID-19 and this pandemic has actually lifted the rug and really shown the dirt that's underneath. How could we keep pretending at this point? Although I still see people continuing to pretend, but there is a different level of awareness, I think, that's come into the collective right now.
Big time. In my financial advisory and planning practice, I never had so many inquiries. I've never had so many new clients come in. It's been incredible. And I think it's because, people's eyes have been opened because we were caught so off guard, so unaware that people realize, I need to be more in control of my financial future and investing. So I remember, when we were deep into isolation in April, May, June, I made a commitment to have, 200 conversations with people.
Yeah.
And I did. A lot of those were through just Zoom calls, where I invited people. But that's because I realized that there was no better time now to preach the message I've always been preaching. But now people are starting to get it on a fundamental level because they are experiencing the impact of not being prepared and of sticking their heads in the sand or not dealing with past trauma. This has been a revolutionary time, and I think it will continue to be that just as long as people like yourself, people like myself, we speak up about it, right? Because I feel like if we don't, once the economy starts to recover and things like that, I really do think that the forces that be, not to be a conspiracy theorist, but the forces that be will double down on those old values. Right? Like consumerism and excess.
We're seeing it. Even I always go back to this example, but after 9/11 happened in the U.S., I remember George Bush, the president at the time, saying, go out and shop. If you want to really support your country right now, get out and shop. Don't be afraid, because literally the economy was dependent on that consumerism. And so again, it's kind of counterintuitive when we're saying to individual citizens, hey, get financially literate, save and invest, have this, fund for a rainy day, when our governments are the most indebted that they've ever been, that people just print money when they need it. It's just the whole system it's questionable. It really is, that we see that the people that are preaching these things often aren't even able to do them themselves. And the thing that's really interesting about the financial piece is that financial illiteracy or debt addiction or any of these things impact all people. It does not discriminate between class, wealth, race, age. I mean, we see that 53% of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck. Those are people that are making six figures and those that are making minimum wage.
Absolutely.
So this is something that is very much ingrained and almost designed in this way.
It is. And I was calling this in 2008 when this happened. I was like, we're in the process right now of being, I guess, the society is transitioning back to feudal times in a sense, right? Where it's the 1 to 10% run the show and the rest of us are just serfs. And I was saying, if we're not careful, we can fall into that. But serfdom, right, or peasantry or modern slavery, it doesn't look like what it did back then. It looks like having 5-figure credit card debt. It looks like living paycheck to paycheck. It looks like sticking with your abusive, underpaying job because of the benefits and because our society is becoming less and less one in which employment is stable.
Right.
I really
do. The precarious work, the gig economy.
I do think we're turning into this really vulnerable system. And that's why it's no surprise and no coincidence that all the billionaires in the States, particularly the ones in tech, they see this coming down the pipeline, which is why they are all so for universal income.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. What are your thoughts on universal income?
Wow. Okay. Right now, from what I know of it, I am for it. I am for it because why not? At the same time, just from, university economics courses, it just makes me wonder sometimes that, if everybody got a universal income or those that needed it most had universal income, would that not create more inflation? Would the prices of things
Well, and this is the problem.
go up.
I think you make a very valid point. And again, from my lens and perspective, the idea of a universal basic income sounds lovely. But at the same time, if we're not addressing these trauma-based issues, if that's again assuming that everyone's experience was all the same. Everyone will get the same universal income and then everything will be fine. No. Because I can give somebody who has experienced extreme trauma a universal income, and I can give someone else who's been okay that universal income, and this person is going to invest it or make it into a business or whatever else and thrive, and this other person is going to blow through it and not be okay because they weren't okay to begin with.
Exactly. Like, it sounds really nice and idealistic when the government or these Silicon Valley billionaires say, oh, with this universal income, we'll have more time for thinking and innovation and this and that. I'm like, no, but human nature, we do like to work and we do like to have drive and motivation. If that is sucked right out of us to the point where to get by, we don't have to do anything, could that be really good? Or could that be yet another way of creating a society that is more and more dependent on these few people at the top?
Well, and that's the thing. If you then have a government infrastructure that's putting universal basic income in place and then there's something you don't agree with, are you feeling like you can exercise your democratic right because you're scared to lose the, universal basic income?
Exactly. And you're addicted to it almost, right?
100%.
And if it continues and it goes on, it's almost like you can't even imagine yourself earning beyond it.
Right. I think this is like a live debate on this right now because I think both of us are trying to understand how we feel about it. And I think that is, fair. And in this particular society where there is such a lack of consciousness around so many of these issues, I worry about any quick fix solution.
Same.
I really, really do. Even if it sounds
Yeah.
so amazing, because we're already so unconscious to so many of the issues. We continue to try and plug holes with money or financial literacy or this and that. I mean, in so many ways, our modern welfare system is in some ways a basic income for folks. And what we often see is people getting stuck in that trap.
I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but in the UK, for example, there's like generations of people who rely on government support.
Yeah.
Like, it's literally becomes like a generational.
Oh, it's intergenerational.
Yeah, for sure.
My family is a perfect example of this. It becomes an intergenerational trauma and it's normalized, it's accepted. And the truth is too, is because you have such intricate issues that have been caused, I will argue, by, slavery, colonization, so many injustices over the years, there's such deep trauma that certain communities are facing that they are not well enough to work.
Oh, yeah.
And they really, truly aren't.
Yes,
and so,
absolutely.
and then they're stuck in a trap and in a cycle because they are relying on a particular aid to help them.
How disempowering is that?
It's the most disempowering thing. And that is the truth. And this is all the rhetoric that, if you have a broken leg, we know that you can go to the doctor, get a cast, and in 6 weeks or whatever it is, and with some physio, you'll be able to walk again. When someone talks about a mental health issue, that person is written off.
Yeah.
That person is written off as if they are not going to be able to contribute in the same way. It's not just looked at as a normal thing that happens to all of us, where we all go through stages where sometimes we're feeling better than others, or we have something crop up, or, a certain incident happens. And so this is the kind of stuff, again, that if we're not talking from that level, no universal basic income is going to solve the issue.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I do believe, though, that we do need time to be innovative. I believe we need that. You cannot force creativity. You cannot force innovation. And when we are left in this cog in the wheel, working these crazy hours, sitting in front of a computer, very little creativity, very little humanness coming out of it, it actually steals and dims our light.
You nailed it. You nailed it so much. And I'm talking from personal experience. The second property I bought, I have two. The second one I bought, I had my professional job in marketing. I worked the numbers and I said, oh my gosh, this is going to take me at least 10 years to save for this if I don't do something. And so I ended up getting 2 more jobs right? One at night and one on the weekends to be able to just accelerate my savings, to cut it down from 10 years to 2 years. And so for 2 years, I worked 9 to 5. I worked about 3 evenings a week, and then I worked during the days on weekends here and there. And I was able to save up the money in 2 years. But that was 2 years of my life where I was too tired to think when I didn't have to. And I remember saying to myself, this is really interesting because the only way it almost feels like to get ahead, say somebody coming from a vulnerable community or that don't have the resources readily available, they have to literally like work themselves to the bone.
Give up their creativity and innovation and humanity.
And I'm like, and isn't that convenient for the powers that be that I'm working so hard to get ahead? And some people are working so hard just to make ends meet. I'm working so hard to get ahead. I can't even like read a newspaper to educate myself on who to vote for. I don't have the bandwidth to think as critically I would like about
to exercise my democratic rights that I generations before me lived and died for to receive.
Exactly. I don't have enough time to build a business or execute on all these other ideas I have because I'm just looking at what I need immediately ahead of me. And it got me thinking, I'm like, this is also probably by design, right? That if you want to get ahead in life, and again, for some people, unfortunately, if they want to tread water, the effort that it requires makes you even more vulnerable to, how do I say this? Like, it takes away even more power that you have than you realize because you're just so drained. And it sounds like so simple, but I think this is more of an issue than we think. And it's just getting worse and worse. And I remember saying this to an Uber driver maybe a few years ago. I was in the car with him, and he was like picking me up from the nightclub where I worked part-time, right, to make extra money. That was one of my hustles. And he said, oh, you work at a nightclub? I'm like, yeah. And he said, is that all you do? And I said, no.
I worked at government nightclub, by the way, when it was still in existence. I don't know if you remember the government.
You worked at
I did.
I was there a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. I was there not just working as well, but hilarious.
Oh my gosh, rest in peace, government.
I know.
That was an iconic
That
place.
was an iconic institution for a particular generation of party goers.
Yes. Yeah, of course. And every year I went to Labor of Love.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So
and their long weekend party in September. I can't remember the name of that one.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I've seen amazing DJs there. So,
oh my goodness. I'm sorry. We went off track there for a second.
We see each other.
He was saying,
So he was saying, I was in this Uber coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning from my nightclub gig. And by the way, the fact that you work there, it just shows the non-traditional paths that you can take to be successful, but people don't recognize it. But anyways, that we can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But anyways, and so he's like, oh yeah, he's like, is this your only job? And I said, no, I have a full-time job. This is just for side hustle. And he's like, yeah, I do the second job too to make extra money. And he's like, man, a few years ago, this job was just to pay for extras. Now the second job is required. And I was like, yeah, actually. And I noticed that too, where I worked at the nightclub, is the people who had day jobs and things like that. When I first started working there, in my 20s, it was a great source of extra income.
Yeah.
And suddenly you find more and more that extra income is actually going towards your living expenses.
Yes.
And that was the evolution of the 10 years I'd been working there. I felt that change.
Yeah.
And that was a red flag to me about where we're heading, and the fact that a side hustle is required now and not something extra you want to do to get a little bit ahead.
Yeah, well, and it's then not even a side hustle anymore. It's just survival. And that just becomes so messed up. And I think that the other piece that is really interesting is what it does to the family. And, and this is another thing where, again, we go into some of the systemic issues because we see that certain groups that have been economically disempowered, meaning that they have to work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet, they can't spend that time with their children. And I know what it feels like to grow up with parents not paying attention. And I know, I was very early dealing with, drug addiction and just finding myself in a lot of very, very tough and scary scenarios that I didn't have the capacity or the wherewithal to navigate my way through. I mean, I thought I did, but I didn't. And that then created new traumas. So not only was I coming from, the financial and, economic trauma of my household and some of the addiction and violence that was happening in my home, but then I was going out and I was re-traumatizing myself by being victimized, violence, assault, and whatever else. And so it was like, how does one succeed? And, this is something that's been so interesting to watch during the pandemic is the impact that this particular recession has had on women. Now, most of the time when we go through a large economic recession, it is those high-powered movers and shakers who are most impacted. It's where all the wealth is kind of held and stored. But because this was very unique in the sense that it impacted children in schools, meaning they couldn't go to school, and, precarious workers or frontline workers were impacted, and so many women not able to juggle. If you were an entrepreneur like me and all of a sudden my kids are home with me full time and my business has been decimated, 100% of my revenue gone, and I'm trying to figure all of that out, it becomes like impossible to do. And so what I'm seeing is this really interesting rhetoric that's now coming out about we've gone backwards. We're losing everything that we've built over the last 3 decades. Everything we built through the women's movement is being lost right now. And they're saying that this is the lowest labor force participation of women in the last 3 decades. But what I am saying is that I have a real feeling inside of me that this idea that we have been working so hard, for to be seen and recognized in business as women, we've been playing somebody else's game.
Thank you.
It hasn't been working for us. We've given up everything. I think this is what I said in my last podcast, which I think resonated. I've given up my body. I've given up my sexuality, my sensuality, my time with my children, my creativity, my femininity to hustle, grind, push, be better than every man, be better than any woman. Like it's not actually sustainable. It's like, is that what I'm really fighting for? Is that what I want all women to be? Do I want to see that?
No,
I don't want that for my sisters.
Exactly. This system is inherently not friendly towards women. And it was built that way. And it was built for a certain demographic. And that is like white males, head of the household with the woman at home from the 1950s. We are still working within that paradigm. And you are absolutely correct in saying that this pandemic has completely exposed that we were playing a game that we weren't supposed to win. We're playing somebody else's 100%.
Game. And they let a few of us win. A few of us are there
token winners
to keep it going. And then it's completely impossible. And it's like what I have had to sacrifice and what I've had to give up to attain this success, and I've been quote unquote successful in my life, but I have also had to give up pieces of myself that aren't for sale. And I sold my time with my children. I sold my relationships with my partner, with whatever else to be in this wheel, to keep going, to keep pushing. And, the worst part is that I was doing it all under the guise that I am helping propel women forward and be there. And then I was like, really and honestly, like I have to question even my own journey here right now and what I'm even advocating for. It's so hard. I mean, this pandemic for me has been a true rock bottom and an up leveling like I've never had.
Same.
Up leveling because I am no longer interested in playing the game.
Same. I'm done. And I was never really like once I started to see it for what it was, I wasn't interested in playing it, but I still kind of like trudged along to go under the radar, right? But once we've hit this moment, I'm like, I am done now officially. It's exposed for everybody to see, like the flaws in the system. It's like, no, time to rewrite the rules.
But that is exactly it. And so I think a lot of the times when we see people disenfranchised or, then we see them actually plugging out. And I'm seeing a lot of people right now at mass leaving the labor force, particularly wealthier women who could have the option are like, you know what, I'm not doing it anymore. But what I am saying is that we don't want to play that game, but we've got to write our own.
We do.
We have got to create our own playbook.
And we have to build it. And unfortunately, because for the first ones, we're going to take a lot of heat for it.
Oh,
right?
God,
Like for your innovative ideas, like I'm sure you've gotten a lot of like raised eyebrows, but we have to do it in a public way to show others and to spread this message and this energy. I totally believe that. And that's something that I've had to come to terms with, that if I want things to move forward in my own little way, I have to do it in such a way that everybody can see it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I resonate deeply with saying that, if we're out in the front lines, I always say pointy edge of progress, you're going to get cut. That's kind of my thing. And it's easy to intellectualize. It's really hard to live. And the Obama event was really, I almost had a nervous breakdown after that event.
I just wanted to hug you.
Yeah.
When I listened to your podcast with Ryan Holtz, I just wanted to hug you.
Oh my gosh. No. But I thank you for bringing that up. And I thank you also for the way that it was perceived because, and it's so interesting. What happened after that event was, I had all my sort of corporate class, like all those people that I had been courting for 10 years as the CEO of the Economic Club, building the relationships, building the trust in me, whatever else. I had all of them very, very confronted by what I did, really, really uncomfortable, not happy about it. And then I had a lot of community folks that were there very uncomfortable and frustrated with what I did too, right? And everyone was kind of scratching their heads like, what is she trying to do? Who is this person? You have then what is this hunger to find people out or to like find what's wrong or like to expose someone. And so there was just so much energy coming at me all at once. And, the whole thing was the wildest and craziest thing in the world because it was all done in 6 weeks. I tried to raise all the capital by myself, giving away half the room without even covering the cost to begin with. Like it was actually evidence of some of my own mental health issues that I have because I am very much someone who my nervous system is addicted to adrenaline because I grew up in an environment where everything was always
like chaotic, right?
Chaotic.
So,
it's actually ingrained. And what I never realized was that, okay, for the beginning years of my life, I didn't have control over that. I didn't have control if I had to lock myself in a room because someone was having a rage, induced fit or whatever else. But later I did have control, but I kept choosing it. So even when things were good, I would sabotage or I would do something else. And so in going through my patterning, something that I realized and in being an entrepreneur, I had this freedom to create. And so because I was at the top of the pyramid, meaning I was the decision maker and the CEO, right when everything was good and we had like cash in the bank and programs were going well, I'd be like, let's do this. Let's do that. Let's open up this office. Let's do that. And I was always constantly looking for that next thing. And I started to do crazier and crazier and crazier things, including this, which was unheard of. To do that level of show in 6 weeks with 6 women that work here. I mean, it almost killed all of us. And when it was all said and done after, and, I was kind of facing some of the attack and the scratched heads and everything else, and I was beating myself up about so much of it. And I was looking around at, the incredible women that work with me and just seeing this hollow stare of almost trauma of like, we can't even do that again. And I was like, I've got to get control of this. I cannot keep leading in this way that I am like willing to bleed for what I believe in. And that's the kind of rhetoric and stuff that I would say. I would say like, if we're going to go down, we're going to go down doing this. Or like, if we're going to bleed, so I bled because I was calling it in. And I left feeling very misunderstood. I felt very disenchanted. I didn't want to do the work anymore. I was like, I'm done. And then I kind of sat with myself and realized, no, I'm not done because this is why I'm here, but I have things to learn. There's things I could have done better. There's stuff that my own blind spots, my own naivety, my own ego, all of it is at play.
I suppose, but at the same time, like we understand classism and racism and systemic racism and biases. We understand it on an intellectual, conceptual level. I don't think anybody could have predicted the vibe that would have been in the room by you mixing and matching tables per se, right? I couldn't have predicted that energy because to me it sounds like something super interesting and noble and bold. And I'm like, I guess that's part of naivete. But like, who was to predict that you're physically actually confronting both sides in that way and that would create some kind of energy?
It did.
I wouldn't have predicted it to that extent. And so I almost think you should give yourself a little flack for that.
Well, and I am. I mean, I'm looking at it now and I'm like, look, it was super badass to do. It was putting exactly everything that I had, putting it on the line for this thing that I so deeply believe. And what that thing is that I believe that in order to solve the complex problems of today, we need a complete diverse table. We need all ages, all experiences actually together, empowered to be able to speak. And one of the reasons why I interviewed him was because, interestingly enough, I was like, who would go up there and use the right language that everyone would be able to feel like they understood what was going on and happening? But again, because there's this very confronting thing that happens when you sit down and interview a former president. People are expecting you to be smart. People are expecting you to say the right thing. It's an incredible amount of pressure. And I made a conscious decision that day. I was like, this is going to be the first event that I'm going to go out there, and I'm not going to talk about my past. I'm not going to talk about my story. I'm just going to go up. I'm going to sit up there, and I'm going to ask the questions the way that they were designed, all around this idea of conscious economy, trying to invite everybody in the room onto the same vibration to have the conversation. That's a very, very challenging task. One that I don't know that I fully succeeded on, because I had so much flack from one side. I had a lot of people that I would consider mentors of mine in kind of the corporate that said, like, you're an embarrassment to yourself.
And, are you kidding me?
Oh, for sure. That you do not have the gravitas to be able to sit up there. And I was like, then you're missing the point, because that's exactly it. That is exactly it, though. I'm not claiming to have it. I'm trying to come up here as a different kind of a leader with a different kind of experience, and I'm asking different kinds of questions. I'm not trying to showcase my intelligence on, policy decisions that he made in the White House, because guess what? Everyone will go blank. No one gives a shit.
Yeah, and you can find those interviews on YouTube. It's like, relax.
100%.
And I'm going to tell you something that's like the raw, honest truth, is that people, including myself, and I didn't even know you personally, but people like myself were confronted also with a young, pretty white woman interviewing Obama. Oh, why couldn't you get like a community leader to do it? That kind of thing, right? So it's interesting. People really had to face their own biases. And I remember afterwards, I felt confronted because I'm like, did I just like judge that woman? Like, why not her? She's the CEO of the Economic Club of Canada, so why not? So why do I think that she somehow has to have all these extra credentials to do that interview? And like, I remember first feeling confronted because you were a young white woman interviewing Obama. But I remember thinking in the back of my head, that's not right, really. That's not right. So I was like, let me just like let it be. Then I heard the famous podcast. Like the interview that you had afterwards with Brian Holtz. And I was like, and there you have it. And now I feel like crap because I had this judgment and this biases without even understanding who you are or what you were trying to do. And I actually do think that interview, I hope that if people haven't listened to it, I hope that they really do.
Thank you.
Because, it'll make them question their own inherent biases. Like, because we all have them. Me, as a Black person that came from Scarborough, clearly I still have them. And it's something that I have to work on.
Well, and we all do.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. And thank you so much for being so candid and sharing your true,
it's
honest
tough.
opinion. No, I appreciate it. That's like, tells me we are going to be BFF, because this is the kind of conversation that we need to have. And I think that there was so many layers to what that event was, especially if you consider that that was one of the biggest things that happened in the city right before COVID hit. It was just a few months before any of this hit. Now, if we were to have done this, completely different.
That's the thing. You were ahead of your time.
Completely
like I said,
different.
You were ahead of your time.
But people did not get it on either side. And that's not true. There were so many that did. And I have to say, like, for me, and I will get a little emotional, it is the young people that keep me going. It's the young people that keep coming back and saying, like, that changed me, or being in that room did this, or I got to meet this, or whatever. And it's like, that is it. But I had to also confront, which is vulnerable to say, but we all have biases, and we all have ego, and we all have stuff that, shame or different things that we are trying to cover up in different ways. And if we are not really clear around our own shadow, those shadows can continue to cause real havoc in our lives. And I have to say that my whole life, because my dad left, when I was born, and because my mom was in and out of my life, I never felt seen by my family in the way that I wanted to. And so this whole thing, in so many ways, was also my ability to be seen.
Like, here I am, I've arrived, and you're going to listen to me and see me.
Yes. Yeah. And that is not actually the right place to be leading from.
Wow.
It's not. And I had to really confront that, because once I was attacked or ridiculed after that, I really lost it. Like I lost my whole equilibrium. I didn't even know who I was anymore. And I was like, that is a ding dong sign that there is massive shadow that I have to go into.
Wow.
Because otherwise I wouldn't have that. If someone tells you, you know, Melissa, you're not good at money and finance and whatever, and you know that that's absolutely not true, it doesn't bother you.
Right.
But if somebody says something to you and there's a nugget of like something like you shouldn't have been up there or you're unworthy to be up there or whatever, and there's something that resonates in that in you, you have the reaction. I was having the reaction.
Wow.
So I had to go in and like, look, if I could have done certain things differently, now knowing what I know, I probably would have. You know, I probably would have. I don't think I would have been the one interviewing him, not because I don't think I'm qualified to do it, but because that would have been a very important opportunity to give someone else. I was giving opportunities all along the way. So why was I not giving that opportunity? And I have to say, because I kept it for my own self to be seen.
Yeah.
And I convinced myself that I was the only one who knew how to navigate it. And that is not true. So there's my truth. And, you know, this is the kind of stuff that we learn and uncover.
You know, there's not many leaders that would have that much self-awareness and that would even come right out and talk about their shadow side in the way that you just did. And so I just want to acknowledge you for that. And that makes me also realize that you're only beginning. Because like if you have these capabilities to own everything like you do and to also do a lot of self-reflection, like, I mean, that is what it takes to be a leader now and to have the kind of change and impact that you and I want to have. And so I like just hearing that. I hope everybody realizes like just how huge that is and how the fact that you're authentic and you're transparent, that's exactly who we need to be putting our confidence in, are people like that.
And that is why I am so delighted to have you as a leader on this show right now, because you walked into this space, sat down with me, told me exactly what you thought, whether it was good or not, or yes and that. And, you know, that is true authentic leadership too. And it is not that that is only something that women can do, but I believe us women are very, very well prepared and positioned to bring that into our economic infrastructure, our business infrastructure. And like, this is what we're doing right now.
Exactly. And one would say that all of the barriers and the criticism that we've received and the fact that because of that, if we wanted to move forward, we were forced to look at ourselves and to be constructively critical of ourselves and therefore learn from it and grow from it. Ironically, that is what's positioning us to be the dynamic and impactful leaders that the world needs.
Yes. That is the age of Aquarius in and of itself.
Yeah.
It's coming into that whole space. So I guess my last question to end off was, you started off telling us this story of being offered this opportunity by this mentor and not feeling good enough to receive it. But you did end up taking that opportunity. So could you please end off with how you ended up going back and accepting that offer to become that incredible Black woman who was holding that position, being a part of that, I don't even know what to call it.
Like becoming a limited partner.
A limited partner, yes. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, so March, I was presented the opportunity, ran away from it because I didn't think I was confronted with the fact that I actually truly didn't see myself.
I love that you ran to like a retreat though.
Yeah, I know. I know. But I still got a retreat in Greece, okay?
I love that.
And so it was June, end of June, I went to the retreat. We did the money exercise, and I realized that everything that was coming up that was blocking me from my dreams and ambitions and potential was all just pure story, pure just made up, constructed story, like not based in a reality. And that, number one, I had the control over my life and the destiny to dictate how I see it go. And number two was that, what's the worst that could happen if I invested in this fund, became a limited partner, and developed all these relationships in the venture capital and technology space? What's the worst that could happen? Investing the money, that was a really scary thing to do, to make that kind of commitment, because it was a 6-figure commitment. And so I said, okay, so what's the worst I could do? Is that like, I don't make a capital call. So I committed to investing a certain amount of money. And then over the next 2 years, they would have capital calls, which was when you were given 2 weeks to a month.
Opportunity to push in a little more.
To pay a chunk of the money that you committed into the fund because they were getting ready to do an investment, et cetera. So I said, what's the worst case scenario if I don't make a capital call, right? Like, for example, I can't liquidate the funds or gather the funds quick enough. I look like a jerk to the general partners. they get a little annoyed with me, and maybe like if I ever see them at an event, I'll like look the other way and like walk away and hide. But like my life's not going to fall apart.
Right.
So like, what am I waiting for? What is holding me back? Why do I think that this is a goal that maybe I'll be ready for in 10 years and not now? I'm like, no, I'm just making up excuses. I've lost out on, I calculated about $1 million worth of opportunities in the past few years because I could never pull the trigger because I had all these limiting beliefs. And I realized at that retreat, it's like, no, that's done. That's done. I'm going to do this. So when I came back to Canada, I emailed Lauren and I said, hey, remember back in March? This is in July. Remember back in March, is this opportunity still available? And she emailed me back. She's like, yes, right away. Let's set up a call. And we talked about it. And she was just so incredible and respectful and excited to have me on. And she recognized my experience, especially when it came to financial services in the Canadian financial services, like regulatory bodies and laws. And she's like, that would be such a great addition to the fund, having that expertise. Like, it'd be great to have you be in an advisory role to one of our fintech startups because of your experience. And that's when I realized that people perceive you in a different way than you perceive yourself. And you need to give yourself a little bit more credit, right? Because she saw me not just as somebody who could invest in the fund, but somebody that was going to be an asset to her firm and to the companies that she's helping build. And once I realized that, I was like, I'm going to do this. This is me now. This is who I am now. And so I made the investment. I actually ended up earning the money in order to do the first $35,000 investment. I earned that extra money in like 6 months because once I committed to it verbally and once I signed the agreement, I was like, okay, it's real. So I'm going to do it. It's so funny to realize how quickly the parachute will show up once you jump over the cliff. Like, it will show up. As long as you don't hide and stick your head in the sand, go out there and do what you need to do. It's going to show up. And so once I did that, I broke into a whole new level of self-identity.
Wow.
Like, now I look back and I laugh because I'm like, oh my God, that's so cute. Like,
wow.
Like, that was so like easy because this is who I am now. I'm like a big time investor.
This is who you are. You're a big time, amazing venture capitalist.
Up and coming. And it's funny because I had to go through so much inner work to be able to see myself that way. But if I can do it, anybody can do it. And because of that experience and because I was willing to jump off the cliff like that, that opened up the whole world of venture capital in Canada to me. And it opened up so much opportunity that led me to this opportunity now, helping run this VC fund. That's the only fund in Canada, as far as I know, that is focused on BIPOC founders.
I mean, your story and everything that you've shared today is such medicine. It's such medicine for our society. It's such medicine for our listeners. And it's medicine for me. Like, you inspire me so much.
Oh my goodness.
And I am so grateful to know you. I know we are going to do some really, really cool stuff together.
Thank you so much.
And I just feel so honored that our paths have come together. Thank you for being here today, Melissa.
My honor, my pleasure. And
where can our
likewise.
listeners find you? Where's the best way to connect with you if we want to find you?
Honestly, just to reach out to me on Instagram at Mel Talks Money. And on Twitter, I am Money Talks Mel.
Okay. We'll link those in the show notes below, as well as any other information that we gave out. We'll reference the podcast that we refer to a lot by Ryan Holtz, who's has an amazing show. I love Ryan. He's so great.
Really great.
And thank you again to our listeners. And we will be back with another episode soon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.